Mr. Riedman, are there any, Ms. Brzezinski, would you call the roll, please?
Betsy Kramer.
Present.
Bill Spicer.
Here.
Corey Bantolin.
Here.
Frank Kelly.
Here.
Dennis Power.
Here.
Jim Sloan.
Here.
Helene Webb.
Mr. Riedman, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair. Actually, tonight we're going to take things a little out of order and take item 6, the appeal of slip termination for 1N17. We'll take that item after the Harbor Commission matters and approval of the minutes. So we'll
Thank
take
you.
that as the third item.
All right, thanks. And this would be the time of public comment, but seeing no one here to speak on public comment on things that are not on the agenda, I will close public comment. And so at this point, Harbor Commission matters, and Ms. Brzezinski, Mr. Riedman.
Seating of new Commissioner Dennis Power and reappointment of Jim Sloan to the Commission. Both commissioners have been appointed to serve 4-year terms expiring on December 31, 2017.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, good evening. I'd like to introduce Dennis Power more formally. He's new to the Commission. He was the director of the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History for 22 years, during which time he oversaw and was responsible for the construction and development of the original Sea Center on Stearns Wharf. He's also served as the executive director of the Oakland Museum of California, president of Laguna College of Art and Design, and currently serves as a member of the Board of Trustees of the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, Santa Barbara Zoo, Ellings Park Foundation, and the Santa Cruz Island Foundation, and now also the Harbor Commission. Longtime Yacht Club member. He has a Harbor 25 in Marina 1, which he and his wife enjoy racing in the Wet Wednesday sailing races. So welcome aboard, Dennis.
Welcome, Mr. Power.
And Jim Sloan was reappointed. He was first appointed in December of 2009, so he received his second term on the Commission through 2017. Jim served on various committees as well as the Commission itself, including the Budget Committee, the Chartering BAP Committee, and the Request for Proposal Selection Committee. And Corey Bantolin, since Commissioner Bantolin was unable to attend an interview, the Council elected to allow Commissioner Bantolin to remain on the Commission until the next opportunity to interview, which is most likely in June. So welcome back, Jim and Corey, and welcome aboard, Commissioner Power.
Would you like to say anything, Mr. Power?
Well, Chair Kramer, thank you, and members of the Commission. I look forward to working with you, and I appreciate the lengthy introduction, but I do have a history in Santa Barbara, and I'm very much looking forward to working with all of you and with the staff.
And we with you. Moving on now to the approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So the next would be the item number 6. Would you give the staff report, please, Ms. Brzezinski? I think it's item number 6.
Appeal of termination of slip 1N17, Mr. David Herring. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission uphold the termination of the slip permit for 1N17 for failure to pay slip fees and deny Mr. David Herring's appeal to reinstate the slip permit.
And I have 2 speaker slips for this. I'm not sure when we want to have them. One from Mr. Herring and one from Ms. Greenwood.
Madam Chair, typically we would give the staff report and then have the
Okay.
and then receive the comments.
I just wanted to let you know that we had these slips.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. The item before you is the slip termination appeal of 1N17. This is a 30-foot slip, again, located in Marina 1 and 17. As far as process goes for the presentation, I would like to review with the Commission the Department's billing process and then discuss the events that have led to this item being before the Commission tonight. As far as our billing process is concerned, it is a simple one, and it is one that allows numerous opportunities for folks to pay, and obviously we encourage that, and we do try to have people pay on time, and when they're late, it occasionally happens to all of us, but we like to make sure that people are comfortable in their slips and continue to be slip holders in the harbor. Our first order of business is every first of every month, slip fees are due, regardless of whether you get a notice or not. People still do get notices, and regardless of whether you get one, you have to pay by the first. We allow a 14-day grace period to receive that slip fee, and then on the 15th day, it's considered late. On or around that 15 date, we send a reminder to slip permit holders, reminding them that, hey, we believe your fee is late. If it's not, can you please contact us so we can reconcile the issues? So there's no pointing of blame or anything of that nature. Our second notice is a 30-day notice. So 30 days after past due, generally around the end of the month or the first of the following month, we send this notice. And at that point, the slip permittee is required to pay in full. So there's no partial payments. That doesn't help. We need the payment in full for what they're behind. And this actually initiates that termination process, notifying them if in 30 more days, if we don't receive payment in full, the slip could be terminated. We then send a third notice, which is a 45-day notice, right around the 45-day mark, just reminding them that in roughly 15 more days, the first of the coming month, the slip will be terminated if it hasn't been paid, if the fees haven't been paid in full. On that 60th day, we send out a notice of termination. So that's 60 days after it was originally due. And we tell the slip permittee that the slip has been terminated, and we ask them to come down, reconcile tell us what they're going to do with their boat and how they're going to deal with the situation. From that point, the slip permittee has 10 days in which to request a waiver of termination, and that waiver of termination is directed to the waterfront director. So that's 10 days after they've been terminated. They are allowed to request that waiver. Now, the waterfront director takes all that information, all the information that's available, the request, what was going on with the particular individual, and makes a determination. If the termination is denied. If the waiver of termination is denied, then that slip permittee has the option to then appeal that decision to the Harbor Commission, and that is how we got here tonight. As far as this particular case with slip 1N17, this particular incident starts back on October 1st. Slip fees were due and no payment was received. On October 22nd, the first late slip fee notice was sent out to the slip permittee, and that is our 15-day notice. And these are all in your report that we gave you as attachments. On November the 1st, the second slip fee notice was sent, and when we get to the second, third, and et cetera, those are both sent U.S. mail as well as certified mail. So we try and double up just to make sure that these people get their notices. So on November 1st, the second late slip fee notice was sent. On November the 22nd, the third late slip fee notice was sent. That's the 45-day notice. I should also note that on November 27th, which is our routine practice, we regularly call these folks just to remind them maybe they're out of the country or some other issue, but again, it's part of our effort to keep people in their slips. On the 27th, phone calls were placed on a cell phone and a home phone, but went unreturned. On December the 6th, the termination letter was sent to the permittee. Again, if it was all by the clock, this would have been December 2nd, but the notice was sent out December 6th. Again, the termination letter. On December 13th, a second termination letter was sent because we hadn't heard a word, and this just reiterated the original termination. On December 30th, we finally heard from the slip permittee, and staff met with the slip permittee to discuss the situation. We informed the slip permittee of the waiver of termination request, and he promptly sent that on that very same day, later that afternoon, requesting that the waterfront director waive the termination. At this point in time, again, we were 7 days past the required waiver deadline, so we really we're trying to bend over backwards here. So that was on December 30th. On December 31st, the waterfront director sent the permittee a letter notifying him that his waiver of termination had been denied, and also informed him of the next step if he chose to take that, which was the appeal to the Harbor Commission. And again, all these letters were sent both U.S. mail and certified. On January 14th, we received an official request appealing the slip termination to the Harbor Commission, and that is also in your staff report. And that leads us to today, January 23rd, with the appeal of the slip termination at the Harbor Commission. So what I tried to do was outline our general process and then how this particular issue fit into our overall process. As far as history of 1N17, it was originally transferred on January 1st of 1999. The first late slip fee notice was sent out 2 months later in March of 1999. Since that time, 92 separate late slip fee notices have been sent, including 65 of those over the past 5 years. I should let you know that in addition to the preparation and distribution of these letters, we've also phoned, as I mentioned. We don't keep a solid log of that. In this particular instance, we did. And again, as I stated, November 27th, we did call. And this is, again, part of our attempt at customer service to keep people in their slips. Unfortunately, the efforts that were put forth have been unsuccessful, and that is why we're here today with this appeal to the Harbor Commission. And based on all the information that we had and the analysis that we've done, staff recommends that the Harbor Commission deny the appeal and terminate the slip permit of 1N17.
Thank you, Mr. Bossi. What next?
Would you like to take the public comment now and then?
Yeah, okay. We have 2 speaker slips here. Mr. Greenwood or Mr. Herring, who would like to speak first? Mr. Herring.
I'm David Herring. I am very aware of the fact that I have quite a long history. Pardon me, I'm not very practiced at public speaking, but I'm trying to do the best I can. I'm a long-term resident of Santa Barbara. I grew up here in Santa Barbara. I've been in the harbor, as it was stated, since 1999. I'm a long-term worker for both Cottage Hospital and now for, I'm a registered nurse. I work for a home care agency, Help Unlimited Home Care. I do per diem work, so my paychecks are not always the same from month to month, and because of that, I have incurred a number of late charges. I've never denied the fact that they were late. I've always paid whatever penalty was asked of me without question. I just want to let you know that I do really appreciate being in the harbor. I do like that harbor. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to my children. I really want them to be able to grow up being in the harbor. I am willing, with whatever cost, whatever bond you want to assess, to continue to be in the harbor. I will pay all back slip fees, whatever penalties are deemed necessary. I would even do a community service of some sort if that's what was deemed reasonable. And I just want to let you know how much it means to me to be in the harbor. And if you want to place a stipulation that there are no late fees for the next 6 months, a year, whatever you want. I'm willing to go that route with you to try and make sure that you understand how much it means to me to be in the harbor and to have my boat in the harbor. As far as the late fee or the termination goes, I cannot speak to anything other than the fact that with the coming up of the holidays, things got a little quite chaotic in my house. I have 3 small children, 2 of which are here with me today. And, you know, I have made steps since all this has happened to do what I can to alleviate all the problems that there were causing that allowed the notices to go unanswered. And as far as the telephone calls, I have no record of getting a phone call either to my home or to my cell phone, which I carry in my pocket 24/7 because of my job. It may have happened. It may have been a failed call that never got, you know, that they thought was good, but cell phones being what they are, sometimes it's not perfect. And right now, I can say that I do everything I can to answer my phone calls in a timely manner. I want to, once again, just let you know that it would really mean a lot to me, a lot to my family, and, you know, whatever it takes. I also want to just to let you know how much I've invested in the harbor over the years. Since I got my boat, shortly after I got my boat and, you know, the slip in 117, I joined the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and I was an active member of the Coast Guard Auxiliary up until about 3 months ago, which I retired. So I was a commander of the auxiliary of the flotilla several times. So I have a lot invested in boating safety, and I want to make sure, you know, every time I go out, not only do I make sure that my boat is safe, but I actively look at the participants on the water to make sure that if there's something that I can do to make it safer, I try and do that as well. So just once again reiterate, it would mean a lot to me if you could find it in your hearts, in the way of the government, to allow this appeal to pass. I realized by the published comment that it's quite an uphill run for me, you know, as far as changing your minds. And I hope that somehow I have. Thank you.
Hi, I was not prepared to speak at all, but he is my nurse. I have a very rare disorder. I require a $20,000 infusion every 2 weeks to live. This is my guy. That home health care agency sent him to my house, and without exception, he is there for me. If it's Sunday and I don't feel well, I call him. His wife is a nurse at Cottage. He'll grab his kids and he will come over to my house, and he will give me my infusion. This is the sort of guy he is. And when I call him, I often call him from other people's phones if I'm not well. He always calls back. He always does. He doesn't know who it is calling, but he always calls back. This is the sort of guy who makes an exception for his patients, for us. I am just a normal citizen. I require this guy to live. And I will tell you, there isn't a time I haven't called him that he hasn't scurried and come down to help me. He makes exceptions for people. This is the sort of guy he is. He just does. I'm asking you guys to make an exception for him. This is the sort of guy you want in your harbor. This is the sort of guy, if somebody had an emergency in the harbor, I'm going to guarantee you he'd be there for him. He's there for me. He's there for his other patients. Life is about exceptions sometimes. He is an exceptional man. So I hope you think about it. Thank you.
At this point, it comes to us. Is that so, Mr. Friedman? Or do you want to
Madam
add
Chair,
anything?
Certainly, and if you have any further questions from staff on the process and what transpired. As far as the phone calls, our accounting coordinator called the home number, which I believe rang, and there was no pickup, and then left a message, a voicemail on the cell phone, 866-9442. But maybe somehow that didn't get through. So, yeah, just if you have any other questions.
Yeah, I have a basic question before the other commissioners. Mr. Herring made several offers. How do you, I don't know what jurisdiction we on the Harbor Commission have actually to entertain those offers that he made. That's in your jurisdiction, in your area.
Madam Chair, we don't have any precedent for this of a community service, additional penalties, or putting forward a bond. I suppose we could enter into something that says stipulate that, the fees are paid on time for 6 months or something. But again, this sets a precedent for all future late payment termination issues. So I think you should choose carefully in where you go with this.
Okay. So it's to the commission. Go ahead. Okay. Commissioner Kelly.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Reedman, when in reading the documentation, it seems that to take care of the outstanding fees that were due, the late fees and everything, was that done by extra monies being paid by Mr. Herring, or was that taken care of by the Waterfront Department applying the deposit to the fees?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kelly, what we do, effective on the date of the termination, we cancel out the account, and we have a 2 months worth of slip rent as a security deposit. So the rent was in arrears. We applied that 2-month security deposit and closed out the account. So he owes no further money on the slip account, on the closed slip account. A considerable amount of visitor fees did accrue because at that point the vessel is placed on visitor status. So in between December 6th and December, whenever, I'm not sure when the boat was removed from the harbor, but it did accrue something like $1,200 in visitor slip fees, which were also paid, and I believe the vessel was removed from the harbor, possibly to the anchorage or the boatyard or something. So there's no money owing to the harbor at this time.
I guess the point I was that I was looking for on the question, when Mr. Herring came to request the waiver of the termination, did he come in and pay all the fees, leaving the deposits in place at that time when he requested the termination, or the fees, it seems, were all taken care of at that time, or a portion of them with the deposit, and then at what point did the extra monies arrive? I guess that's the question I'm looking for.
Well, the extra monies from the security deposit were applied at the date of the termination on the 6th. And so the additional money for the visitor slip fees were paid as required before he removed the boat from the harbor. So it's two separate things, the slip account that was closed and then the ongoing visitor slip fees that accrued before he removed the boat from the harbor.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I see that Mr. Herring has something he wants to add. I'm not sure the process of this. It's to the commission now, but I think we could be somewhat informal in this, since to get further testimony from him subsequent to at some point, or what?
Certainly, Madam Chair, if you have questions from the appellant, that's
Yeah, I
that's
think-
appropriate to ask.
Yeah, we ask him a question. Could you wait until we discuss a little bit more, and then we will ask you? Thank you. Commissioner Sloan?
Go ahead, I think my question was answered.
Okay.
I was just, we've heard an impassioned plea, but by the time this comes to us, did you or Mr. Boston, you've engaged Mr. Herring directly prior to tonight, were some of these extraordinary measures that he brought up discussed, engaged, and like you said, this is outside the bound, there's no precedent. So I'm just curious on those conversations if, was there not any resolution that forced it to come to us tonight?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Spicer, Mick Cronman and Brian Bossi and I met with Mr. Herring on December 30th, and we explained the process, and he explained that that his finances were somewhat disorganized, and receiving the notices, he hadn't been receiving them or misplaced them or something. At that time, he did offer, to do some sort of thing, as I recall, community service or a penalty, and that sort of thing. But again, we were treating this within our boundaries per the municipal code as an ordinary slip termination. So at that point, I don't think it's appropriate to accept money or anything at that point.
Commissioner Webb?
On the 92 notices of past due, those certified letters and staff time, how would you equate all of that work and money? Does the tenant repay you for such?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Webb, just the $35 late fee would help offset all the certified letters and staff time making the phone calls and so forth. This is the file right here and all the certified letters and so forth. So there's an amount of effort, and we try and send one first-class mail as well as certified. So if for some reason nobody's there to sign for the certified one, they'll get the other one first-class mail, or vice versa. In this case, the November 22nd letter was signed for, so we know that one was received at the residence.
And that November 22nd, again, was the 45-day notice.
I have a question, Mr. Friedman. How often do these terminations happen? We have not had an appeal since, I think, 2007. Is this infrequent within the waterfront, or?
Madam Chair, it is fairly infrequent. I believe we actually had 2 appeals that came before the commission in 2007, and you and Commissioner Kelly were the only ones here now that were present then.
Right.
So it's the first that the rest of you've seen. We have had other terminations that were not appealed, where the folks just went on their way.
And how much of a waiting list is there for slips in the harbor? I mean, I understand this is a consideration. I mean, these are city property basically, and it's pretty valuable.
Well, the waiting list was closed in 2000, so it's not really a factor in terms of.
Well, in terms of if Mr. Herring does not get back his slip, presumably it will be going to somebody else.
That's correct. It would be going to someone who's been on the wait list at least 14 years, most likely quite a bit more than that.
For this size slip, for this
Correct.
length slip?
Correct. So, we do feel a certain obligation to the folks on the wait list who pay $40 a year to remain on that wait list, to provide them with a slip when we can, when something like this goes awry.
And has, at any point when you've had to deal with terminations, have you ever said, okay, we'll try something else, we'll give you another 6 months or something of that sort?
Madam Chair, not in this kind of a case. I mean, we may have had somebody come in on the day of the termination or the day after the termination and say, I can pay by 5 o'clock tomorrow or something like this. But in a case like this, where we never heard anything back for 24 days or whatever it was at all, the time had expired to request a waiver, and it was kind of, old news by then.
It's the lack of communication back, Mr. Herring, to the waterfront that concerns me, along with the fact that there are people waiting for this slip. You indicated you had something more to say. I'll ask you if you want to say.
I just wanted to add that, yes, I did incur almost $1,400 worth of visitor slip fees, which was 28 days of.
Sorry,
Of-
excuse me. That was my error. I didn't turn that for you.
Okay. 28 days worth of visitor slip fees, $1,400 plus a little bit. In order to get my boat ready to leave the slip, I had to keep it just a little while longer. Without grudge, without any begrudging remarks, any thoughts, I paid the slip fees. That equals almost 4 months worth of slip fees that I would have paid otherwise. I'm willing to pay another 4 months tomorrow
Okay.
if it means you guys understanding how much it means to me. And I don't know how the communication got so awry on my part. I take full responsibility for it, but I can guarantee you it won't. I've already put matters or things in place to make sure that the kind of communication errors that have happened in the past aren't going to happen again. And you've heard from Mrs. Greenwood, how I feel about making sure that I answer my phone calls. I have gotten phone calls from the harbor office saying that I have 5 days to come and pay my slip fees, and I usually try and get down there that day or the next day to make sure that there's no problem with it. There have been a number of times that I've sent my slip fees via bill pay through Wells Fargo, and apparently it goes to the city instead of to the harbor, and that has stretched matters out a couple of times. I won't do that again. I did that. The last one was sent out October 25th of 2013, and I'm assuming because I've been told that I'm almost 3 months over, that was never received. So I think from now on, it's going to be cash in hand coming into the harbor directly, so there is no mistake where the money is going. So, thank you.
I think it comes back to us at this point. Commissioner Bantalin?
I think the issue for me is one of communication as well, and I think responsibility. And as Chair Kramer mentioned, this 92 separate instances from 1999 is not a couple instances from a couple months. And I think we'd be more inclined to give a little leeway if it was a couple instances over a couple months or a couple years. So I would make a motion to uphold the termination.
I think it's been moved and second. Right. Any discussion? And I think at this point we should vote. All those in favor of the motion to uphold the staff report?
Aye.
Aye. So, I'm sorry. But, good luck. Next, on to the department update. Mr. Meadman, would you give the director's report, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioners. In terms of council actions, the council approved increasing appropriations from the $250,000 previously approved in the Waterfront Department Capital Improvement Plan for the Sea Landing pedestrian walkway project by $70,000 for a total of $320,000. This was because the bid came in higher than we originally anticipated, and we did add some additional work to the project, increase the scope of the project. The council, sitting as the board of directors of the Santa Barbara Financing Authority, also authorized the execution and delivery of Series 2014 waterfront refunding revenue bonds in an aggregate amount not to exceed $14 million and authorizing related actions and documents. And this is what we discussed a month or so ago about our refinancing our bond issue. So it's not done yet, but the banks are working with the city attorney's office to get the little details sorted out. And that detail is our loan with the Department of Boating and Waterways, which has to subordinate to this loan. So it's moving forward. And in terms of tentative items for the February meeting, we intend to have before you a 2015 budget overview. Again, it's the second year of a 2-year budget, so it should be fairly minor adjustments. The Harbor Festival update that we discussed, I believe, at the November meeting. We've been meeting with tenants and business owners on that. And then a mid-year mooring area report and update. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the commissioners? Comment. I have a question, Mr. Friedman, about the Harbor Festival update. Former Commissioner Friedman was concerned about that and we talked about having a committee to deal with that, or subcommittee, rather. Is that going to happen?
We could certainly do that.
I mean, I'm not urging it. I'm just saying this was, he felt strongly about it. And
my respectful suggestion would be that we bring you the report first, and then if there's more work to be done, then we could form a committee at that time to work directly with staff on that.
Sounds good. Okay.
Thank you.
Next would be the business report. Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Madam Chair. This month's business report is about technology and bringing the department into the modern technological world, if you will. The first item I have for you is a marina management update. Back in September, I came to the board and updated you folks on the installation, the almost installation of much needed new marina management software. And I am happy to say that that installation was recently completed, and the new management software will better serve the citizens of Santa Barbara, staff, and especially our harbor and waterfront tenants. The new software is from Professional Software Incorporated, and they went through an RFP process to get that. It's a more efficient and accurate means of data management. It provides accounting and billing services for slip holders and visiting boaters, and also helps out waterfront department staff. One of the big changes is that all the billing functions will move from city's finance department over to the waterfront department, so we will be directly responsible for that. One of the hopes is that we won't have that delay when people send it to the city and down to us. There can be a delay, so we'll be directly responsible for that. The new billing statements, the newly formatted billing statements were mailed out in the December billing. And one of the things we are working on, the next phase of this, is working on electronic billing statements, which is just a more convenient option for receiving your statements. Many of you, I'm sure, receive them, whether they're phones or otherwise, that come electronically, saves on paper, postage, staff time, et cetera. So we are working on the next step, implementing something of that nature. As far as the next version is the city has also started a new financial management system. The previous system was in use since, I believe, 1990. And the gentleman who built it still works here with the city. And so he's seen his program phased out and a new program phased in. City finance and IS staff, as well as everybody in the city, has been working very hard to get up to speed on this new program. As you can imagine, it's a major undertaking. The city's been preparing for this for months and planning for it for years. The new system is brought to us by Tyler Technologies, and it's called Munis. It's a financial and human resource management software program. The old program It worked. It took quite a bit of learning and trial and error, but we have many experts in the city, but probably more who aren't experts. So what this new software will do is allow us to pull up reports easier, really drill down on details. It provides more of a streamlining for invoice approval. I should say that with something this large, there are going to be glitches, and so we are working that out. And it's been quite an eventful couple of months technology-wise down at the waterfront. And Kathy Sangster and Damian Goodall have been working nonstop with both of these issues, working out details and really keeping us all up to speed on it and doing what they can to make this whole system work. So that's our technology update for the business services report for this month.
Thank you very much for the report. Are there any, Commissioner Kelly?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Brian, it's always exciting when the harbor, the waterfront department brings something in-house because it gives us an opportunity to save costs. You know me and costs. So since we have been paying the city to do some of our billing functions, do we anticipate some savings moving forward since we're bringing that in-house?
We anticipate some savings once we get it all ironed out. Finance department will still be doing a number of things for us, so it's going to be how we cut out certain aspects and keep others and get a savings out of that. But yeah, we do expect some savings from that.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Sloan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we do online slip payments now?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, that's a great question, and I should have mentioned that. No, we cannot. I'm sorry. That's probably why I didn't want to mention it, because it's a no. The software program does allow for that to take place, but the requirements that our city, as well as many other cities, have in place, we can't make it happen through this particular vendor. Just when you're dealing with credit cards and online payments, there's a whole new level of security internet security that needs to be in place. And unfortunately, this provider doesn't offer it. We'd have to go through a third-party provider, which we did research. But and it would work for something like when the city, you can pay your water bill online. You've got tens of thousands of people with water bills, so the cost benefit is there. Sure. In this particular case, with the size of our harbor and with the amount of people who from that grouping would sign up for something like that, it just wouldn't pay out. We would actually be spending money to do an electronic billing process. So you'll get your statements, but you won't be able to pay online. But we do offer the auto pay option, right, which is still highly advanced. It's not paying your own online, but it works, and you don't have to worry about sending in your check. You don't have to worry about coming down to the waterfront, although we'd like to see you. You can pay it online, and it's done.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that auto pay function is a good one. So, thanks.
Commissioner Webb.
Thank you for your report, Brian. When you send out, or eventually when we get to the electronic billing, will slip permittees who don't have access to computers still get mailed a bill?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Webb, yes, they will. It's basically however you choose to receive it. Similar to a lot of your utility bills, you can opt for the paper or the paperless. It would be the same thing. We wouldn't just, everybody's getting electronic and people don't have it, because we want to get paid, and I'm sure people want to pay their bills. So we'll work with everybody to make sure they get their billing statements however they choose.
Anyone else? Thank you, Brian. Okay, on to the Harbor Operations Report. Mr. Condon.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Well, certainly it was mild by Midwest standards, but for Santa Barbara standards, it was one heck of a chilly night on Parade of Lights on December 8th, with temperatures ranging in the high 30s to the low 40s. But that didn't deter 22 hardy boaters from participating in the 28th Annual Parade of Lights. And they all decorated to a rock and roll and holiday. It was a flat sea, a clear, crisp night. It was absolutely beautiful. And Kristen Beadle aboard the Aldebaran was the grand prize winner. There were tons of prizes. We were about 5-6 boats short of last year, but the amount of prizes were the same, so it was consolidated among those who chose to participate. So a great time was had. After the parade, we had a spectacular fireworks display, care of Bay Fireworks, and then speaking of rockin' and rollin' holidays, a heck of a great after-party, awards party at the Maritime Museum. So the list of people we'd like to thank who cooperated and participated and joined us on this is far too long for me to enumerate here, but the thanks goes out to all of them. And I never miss this opportunity. It's not too early to circle the calendar for Sunday, December 14th of this year for the 29th annual Parade of Lights. We look forward to seeing a little warmer weather, maybe by 5 to 10 degrees, and more boats and more. Actually, you know, be honest with you, in terms of more people, there were still thousands of folks on the wharf and on the breakwater and other various venues, bundled up, albeit, but they were there. So we appreciate their participation in the event as well. On a breezier note, forgive me, we had a powerful northeast windstorm with gusts actually nudging up around 100 miles an hour on January 9th, and it really pummeled the waterfront. They were sort of, it was like a sustained 60 with micro bursts of 80, 90, and close to 100. And coming down the next morning, I live in Goleta, and it was breezy in Goleta, but coming down the next morning, I was astounded to see the amount of torn sails and coolers and trash cans and surfboards, you know, blown off the tops of boats and what have you. There was also some damage to some buildings. I have a few photos to show you. Shingles blown off the Waterfront Center building, sailboats, blown on top of each other on West Beach, and actually a boat was blown off its jack stands in the Harbor Marine Works boatyard, falling across another boat, crushing, I think it was a port side railing on that boat. So there are a lot of repairs were undertaken, and I think including rearranging storage boxes for the outriggers on West Beach and getting those boats righted and what have you. I believe all of the repairs have been completed. I got a few photos to show you of what that looked like. Here's the boat that collapsed off its jack stand, and you can see how it fell right on top of the boat next to it in the boatyard. Here were the sort of tar paper shingles blown back off the seashell sheds, and then here you can sort of see where the tile was blown back, sort of come untethered from its wiring on the Waterfront Center building, and a contractor had that repaired within 24 hours. And this again is a shot of West Beach where boats were blown, actually lifted up, I hate to say it, Mary Poppins style, and blown several feet and landed on other boats. It was a considerable damage there to some of those vessels. So that was the sum of it. I'd like to think that all those repairs have been made, and thankfully those events are few and far between at the waterfront. It's very interesting. You know, usually when we have an event like that, it's from northwest winds. It's from the clearing winds after a storm. It's pretty rare to see that strong a northeaster that comes rolling, gathers momentum coming down the north side of the front country and blasts its way through the harbor like that. Usually that's something to the south of us where they get that kind of power and damage. A reminder to boaters, vessel registration renewals were due December 31st. And as boaters know, or hopefully do know anyway, those are biennial. Those are 2-year registrations, and they require, and I'm going to show you a photo right here. Whoops, I'm sorry. Once you get your registration, it should always be kept on the boat. A copy, and you'll get CF stickers as they're known. And for those watching or those who have access to the staff report and need a reminder, this is the way and the design of how they should be placed. I could go into the, offsetting color, contrast colors to the hull and the block letters and how high they are, but it's all on the DMV website. There's a tab for boat registration where you can find all this information. But here's an illustration that shows pretty clearly where exactly those stickers must be. So who needs to register their boat? Well, generally every sail-powered vessel over 8 feet and every motor-driven vessel, regardless of length, that is not documented by the U.S. Coast Guard and is used on state waters is subject to DMV registration. Now, I say usually and I say most because there are some very esoteric exceptions to these. And rather than step in a pothole trying to list all of those, I would respectfully refer folks to the DMV website if they wanted to see what those exceptions are. Now, when it comes to Waterfront Department and Harbor Patrol, who are, of course, our boating safety officers, we recommend registering all craft, particularly for identification purposes. You know, you may have a kayak that doesn't require registration and what have you, but when it blows out to sea and it's 4 miles off the beach and we recover a red kayak with no identifying numbers on it or a name or what have you, we have no idea whose it is. So you can also, quite frankly, if it doesn't require registration, you can, etch it in with a tool. You can write your name and phone number on it. But the safest bet is just to register it with the DMV. Now, for vessels that have been registered previously, the cost to re-register is $20. But this year, the landscape has changed a little bit. For those of you who have re-registered your boats, you know what I'm about to tell you probably. And that is that there's an additional $16 quagga mussel prevention program fee that's added to it. Now, that fee is in those monies, which will be millions and millions of dollars ongoing, are intended to underwrite the cost of prevention programs from these mussels, quagga and zebra mussels, that are freshwater based, but they clog intake pipes, they clog to major aqueducts and water delivery systems throughout the state. It's becoming a really unfortunate invasive species problem. So those monies will be used to fight that infestation and support prevention programs. Now, that being said, you can opt out of that. If you're only going to use your boat in marine waters and salt water of the state of California, you do not need to pay that extra $16. But the key is you need to opt out. It's not you have to opt in. It's like you're either going to pay it or you have to check the box that says I'm only going to use it in marine waters and pay the fee as it otherwise would have stood. So that is about it on that. And I again, folks who have more granular, if you would, or questions or interests about this should certainly visit the DMV website. It's easy to find, and all this information is on there as well. And finally, I'm happy to report that after many months of waiting, this is not unrelated to the Department of Boating and Waterways becoming a division of Boating and Waterways under the state's Park and Recreation Department. After many months of waiting, we finally got paperwork, contract agreement paperwork from the division approving our $10,000 Abandoned Watercraft Abatement Fund grant. As you know, we use these grants to dispose to remove and dispose of abandoned vessels, recreational vessels, and we typically we haven't been lucky because we have a drought, but we've been lucky because there have been no storms and no boats have hit the beach yet this year. So hopefully we're getting this money just in time. We're required to pay 10%. It's a 90% grant, but a new twist to the program is that 10% that we owe can be paid with in-kind services, staff time, storage fees, and what have you. So administrative fees as well. So that helps us from having to pay cash up front. That used to be the old model where we'd pay 10% of the grant. The first 10% of the grant we'd had to eat. On this it would be $1,000 worth of cost we'd have to eat. It's not that way anymore. And as a final note, we've participated in this program, gotten grants every year since 2005, and during that period we've managed to remove and dispose of a total of 63 abandoned vessels. So we think it's a good program. We look forward to participating some more in it, and next Tuesday, City Council has on its consent agenda approval of the acceptance of this grant, and then we'll fast-track it so we have it in place. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mick. Are there any questions from the Commission? No questions. Commissioner Power.
I suppose one question for Mr. Cronin, Chair Kramer. Having moved back to the community and not experiencing only but the last 2 or 3 parades of lights, I was wondering if fireworks is a standard feature of those, and if you intend to continue those in the future. I know that there were a couple of concerns by some members of the public about being caught by surprise and scared dogs and things like that. So I just wondered what your reaction is to that. Thank you.
Sure, fair question, certainly. Madam Chair, Commissioner Power, Yes, it's been a tradition of the Parade of Lights for more years than I've worked for the waterfront, and I think almost the entire time, if I'm not mistaken, for its 28-year history. Regarding the fireworks themselves, starting with the 4th of July, we've tried to modify the fireworks show to take out what they call the salute shells. Those are the ones that don't make a lot of light, but they make a lot of boom. And fireworks is fireworks, and we try to alert the community and publicize this event the best we can. It's certainly understandable that some people like fireworks, which seems to be the most folks, and some people may have, not such an affinity for them, but we do what we can to make it a razzle-dazzle show with the least amount of impact to, marine mammals and dogs and what have you as we can.
Again, Commissioner Webb.
Mick, speaking of history, and thanks for your report, was the grand prize winner the first boat to win from the Anchorage? Is that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Webb, maybe you can correct me if I'm incorrect, but I believe it's a slip permittee. Yeah, the Aldebaran, he's corrected me on this pronunciation all day. The Aldebaran, I believe, is a slip permittee, a long-time slip permittee in the harbor.
Was it a trimaran?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
But I could be incorrect. There's my qualifier.
Okay.
Thank you, Helene. I appreciate it.
I have a question about the grant, Mick, about the removal of boats. If there are no storms and there are no boats needing to be removed, does the department keep the money, and can it be applied for the following year?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. The answer is yes and yes. It's actually a one-year grant. It's a 2-year grant. But if there are a bunch of storms and we run out, we can reapply. The deadline's in each April. So let's say in the next couple months we have a March miracle or something like that, and boats end up washing ashore that have been sitting on the anchor for a long time, which is usually the case. We sort of get a thinning of boats that haven't been attended to in the anchorage. And we spend the $10,000, yes, we can turn around and apply for another grant. But if we don't spend the money, we can stretch this money out for 2 years.
Great, thank you very much. And for what it's worth, my Mariner father always said as Aldebaran. Yeah, I mean, that's what I was brought up with from him, by a seaman. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Moving on now to the new business, I believe. Mid-year budget report. Mr. Bossy, again.
You want me to read the recommendation? Want me to read the recommendation?
Please, Ms. Brzezinski, would you read the staff recommendation?
Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive and review a status report on the Waterfront Department fiscal year 2014 mid-year budget revenues and expenditures.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair. I am here to give you a brief overview of our mid-year budget report going from July 1st, 2013 through December 31st of last year. First off, we'll start with our year-end revenue projections. And just to explain the chart up on the screen, on the left we have our 4 main revenue programs: property management, financial management, parking services, and marina management. The next column over is our fiscal year 14 budget. So that's the number that was approved by Harbor Commission as well as the City Council. Next to that, the third column, we have our fiscal year 14 actual year to date. So that's the revenue we have seen through December 31st of 2013. And I'll explain these a little bit as I get into it. And fiscal year 14, the next column over is fiscal year 14 projection. And what we do here is we take that actual year to date and then use 3 years of our seasonally adjusted averages for those, and that pumps out a number for our fiscal year 14 projection, and that would be through June 30th. And then the final 2 columns are our projected year-end variance in dollars, and our final column is our projected year-end variance in percentage over the approved budgeted amount. So right now, as you can see, everything's holding about status quo. Our property management is projected to come out at about 1% above what we budgeted. However, again, this was through December 31st. If we continue to have weather like this, I'm thinking that the restaurants and others will see their revenues increase, and that will result in increases for us, hopefully. As you know, both a lot of the restaurant business and a good part of the parking are very weather dependent. So we continue to have these warm falls and no winters, and that comes through in dollars and cents. Our financial management, that's taken care of by the city's finance department, so we don't have a lot of say there. And it continues to be, well, rather lackluster, for a better word. Our parking services are currently projected to be up about 6% over our budgeted amount of a little over $2.2 million. And our marina management is coming in right at budget. So overall, when you add all those up, our totals, it looks like will be about 1% above our budgeted revenue amounts. I'm sure hoping that's more than that, but it's always good to see a positive in there. Next, we have our revenue by programs. And what we've done here is taken our actual year, again, the four main revenue source or programs, our actual year to date through 12/31, and it compares it to last year at the same period, 12/31 of 2012. And the final two columns are the changes from the prior year. So you can see with our property management, again, that nice fall and a good summer are again adding up to about a 5.45% increase over last year. Our financial management is down about $7,000 from last year, or 10%. Our parking services is up about almost 19%. And our marina management over last year at the same time is up about 2.21%. So overall, versus last year, fiscal year 2013 at this time, we're up 6.38%. So just kind of a summary of the high points. Our property management is up 5.45%. Included under property management is the revenue we receive from our cruise ships, and they remain an important component of our local non-peak season economy. We saw our first cruise ship last week for the season, and we have, I believe, 17 more tentatively planned for the spring of this season, so that continues to be a good revenue source, especially when we factor in the Maritime Museum satisfying their loan requirements and not having to pay a regular lease payment to the city, as well as the oil worker folks and their departure down to Carpinteria 2 years ago. Our 5 self-pay parking lots, those are the ones with the Luke systems that were approved by the Harbor Commission and installed. Those are up an average of 37%, which is quite amazing. I think part of that is due to weather. Part of it is due, we did have a slight fee increase that began July 1st. I also think that people are more apt to pay because it's a whole lot easier than making origami with your dollar bills and shoving them in that little slot. This makes it a whole lot easier. We found that 60% of payments, I believe it's 63% of payments, are done by credit or debit card. So that continues to be a good investment. And our marina management program is tracking slightly higher than fiscal year 2013. So far, we have had 29 total transfers, and 17 of those were at the 30-foot or below level, and 12 of those were at the 35-foot or above level. So not quite an even slip, more on your smaller end, your 30 and belows. Now on to expenditures. You have the programs on the left that we break everything out into. Our our approved budget numbers for fiscal year 14, and our year-to-date expenditures as of 12/31/13. And finally, make the math a little easier, what we've done is at the 50% mark, where we're at as far as expenditures for the budget year. So everything's pretty much on pace. Admin and community relations, our property management expenditures, financial management as well. That's seen a slight bump up in expenditures, and a good part of that is the extra work that was put in with the installation of our new marina management program, as well as the new city's financial system. Our parking services is just below. What else of note? Our harbor maintenance is at about 61.94%, which isn't uncommon at this part of the year. A lot of costs are front-loaded. And our facility design and capital, that's at 60%. That's common as well because the debt service payments are under that particular program. And so right off the bat, about, I believe it's 87% of our debt service is paid out at the start of the fiscal year. So that's why you see that above that 50% mark. So we're just slightly, again, 55.46, so we're just slightly above that 50% mark. If you take out our encumbrances, which some have been paid off, some have not. These are basically contracts that are let at the start of the year. If you were to take out that $740,000 in encumbrances, that would take us to right at 50%. So that's a good thing. We're right on target. We've had $772,000 transferred to fund our capital programs, which is the budgeted amount. Again, regarding the debt service, $739,000 or 87% of that was our fiscal year 2014 principal payment on our debt service. And again, we're on track with our budgeted expenditures for this fiscal year. And that concludes my mid-year budget report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. As you know, we're starting the budget process, or maybe you don't, but we're well aware of it. We had our first meeting earlier this week. Was it last week? They all kind of blend. And we'll be back to you in the February, March, April, and I believe the rest of the year with budget updates and decisions for you folks to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bossy. Do you expect to call the budget subcommittee, by the way?
Yes, we do. We plan on doing that shortly. We were supposed to get our final numbers from finance this week. However, with the new switchover of the systems, that's been delayed a little bit. We wanted to wait to get those final numbers till we have the subcommittee meet. But I think we're going to go ahead and use the old system, which is still out there for us, and get something set up in the very near future.
Thank you. Other questions from the commission? Commissioner Spicer.
Just one in the weeds question. A couple months back, we had talked about making some changes to the Garden Street lot in parking so that it could be accessed from the Funk Zone, and we thought that might increase its revenue. Is that, and I know we had a lot of trouble getting a fence moved and a stair built. Can you just tell me where that's at and if we do see any increased revenue on that?
I'll defer to Mr. Treiberg on that one.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Spicer, we completed the improvements on our side of the fence. The property owners in the Funk Zone are going through some zoning issues right now. As a matter of fact, going to ABR this week or next week. So once they kind of resolve their zoning issues, they will open the fence, and then we will hopefully realize some increase in revenue and use in that lot.
Okay. And no more questions, anybody?
Just a comment, Madam Chair. I wanted to thank you, Brian, for putting in the number and the size of the slips on the slip transfer fees. I know you knew I was going to ask that question, and you got it in there. And so it lets us know that it's not one or two large transfers that carried the ball. Thank you.
On to the dredging contract, Mr. Treiberg.
You want me to read the recommendation?
Excuse me?
Want me to read the
Sorry, Ms. Brzezinski, would you please read the staff report? I'm sorry. Do this again.
Corps of Engineers dredging contract. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive and review a status report on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers 3-year dredging contract for the harbor's main federal navigation channel.
Thank you, Ms. Brzezinski.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Suspiciously absent from the harbor entrance so far this year has been the AIS's dredge law in Sena. It's been an unusual year working with the Corps of Engineers on this particular project, and I was going to give you a little bit of an update on that. But by way of background, The Santa Barbara Harbor is authorized for dredging and maintenance under the 1972 Rivers and Harbors Act. It's a federal authority to dredge the harbor. It's the Corps of Engineers' responsibility, and they do so under an annual appropriation. So, like a lot of the federal acts, there's the authority is there, but the actual funding is a year-by-year thing. So every year, we kind of have to go through this funding exercise to make sure that that the funds are actually there. About 300,000 cubic yards of sediment every year are deposited in Santa Barbara's harbor within what is defined as the federal channel, which is defined in the Act, and those are kind of the limits of that channel. Everything outside of that channel is the responsibility of the Waterfront Department. Every few years, we'll have a project that may dredge around West Beach or inside the harbor near some of the slips and whatnot, but that hasn't happened for quite some time. The Corps of Engineers, under its responsibility to dredge the harbor, renews permits about every 6 years. The last permit renewal was in 2010, and it's the same suite of permits anybody else would have to get from the Coastal Commission and everybody else. They'll resume those efforts in 2016. The last time they renewed permits, there was no changes to the program. Construction is a little bit different. They do it in a 3-year cycle. The last 3-year cycle ended in April of 2013, which started a new 3-year cycle this summer. Going out to bid for a 3-year contract, theoretically, was going to be the fall of 2013 through the spring of 2016. The funding has been secured. There's $2.665 million in the President's FY 2014 budget. Took a while to get it all approved and actually through a continuing resolution, but it went out to bid in October. Only one bid was received this year, which was really pretty unusual. AIS submitted a low bid of $6.3 million for all 3 years, which is an acceptable amount. The problem is they did what's referred to as front-loading the first year of $3,650,000 for 2014. And as you can see, that significantly exceeds by almost $1 million what's in the President's budget for 2014. For the first year ever, the Corps rejected this bid as unbalanced. It's nothing we've ever seen in the past. In the past, what the Corps used to do is they'd reprogram funds from one project to another. For example, Mission Bay may have had a project with extra funds, and they would just shift it up into Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara funds have been shifted to other ports and harbors routinely, but they're not doing that anymore, and it has a lot to do with their reduced budget. They just don't have the money to do that, so they want all these contracts to fit within the budgeted amount. So the Corps is renegotiating with AIS. And unfortunately, that has resulted in some changes to the contract that are a little bit of concern to us. To put this in perspective, the last few years, since 2006, which is the recent history of our dredging, this bar graph indicates how much we dredge in the fall and in the spring, and then the total amount for each year. And it varies dramatically from year to year. In general, it's over many years, many decades, it's been about 300,000 yards. It's been a little bit light lately. The highest amount in 2008 was 394,000 cubic yards, and the lowest amount was the following year at 161,000 cubic yards. So this is kind of the range we're working with whenever we look at dredging projects. The first disturbing change to the contract is the Corps has decided that for whatever reason, they're going to reduce the each cycle amount of dredging to 120,000 cubic yards. It's typically 150,000, reduced to 120,000. You can see that doesn't capture all of the dredging that's necessary. They took the last couple of years and said, well, it looks like 120,000 yards will do it. And this is part of the balancing the budget with this part of the contract. For this particular year, assuming we get some dredging done, they have decided to limit it at 180,000 cubic yards. So we have not had a fall cycle this year. We won't have a fall cycle. The only thing we will have is a spring cycle of dredging. So as opposed to having 150,000 plus 150,000, they've limited it at 180,000. There's only 1 year where we've dredged less than 180,000 in the last 7 years. And like I said, this last several years have been pretty low. So this is a little bit of a disturbing trend. We hope things are going to turn around. The Corps does have the money for overages, but like I said, we've expressed our concern related to the contractual changes. This image just indicates kind of where you see all the dredging. The darker the red, darker the purple is where most of the sand is deposited, where most of it is dredged from. Way on the outside of the harbor, it's a thin lens of sand. They don't dredge. And typically way into the harbor, it's very static, and there's almost no sedimentation, especially back in the Federal Channel. But these two photos indicate kind of how the sand accretes over time. This is a low tide shot looking out at the breakwater extension in September. And you can kind of see where the sailboat is, the sand spit's kicking out a little bit. And here it is in December. Same view, same tide. That's a lot of sand. And this is considered a feeder beach into the Federal Channel. So once we get large waves, they erode off the sand spit into the Federal Channel. Throughout the summer, it happens gradually. So when they dredge in the fall, they can capture what has happened over the entire summer months. During the winter, it happens very rapidly. In 2009, the largest year that we ever had any dredging, 50,000 cubic yards washed off the sand spit over the course of a weekend in one swell. That's a lot. That's roughly 1/3 of everything that happens in a single weekend. So we're somewhat vulnerable right now. There was a couple of issues associated with this recent contract. First and foremost is there's a single bidder. There's been multiple bidders in previous years, but the main reason why there was a single bidder is based on unique rules for Santa Barbara Harbor. The Air Pollution Control District and the California Air Resources Board have adopted rules and regulations related to portable diesel engines. In those rules, you can use those rules, you can use diesel engines if you meet certain emissions requirements, but in those rules there is a prohibition for diesel dredges in Santa Barbara, regardless if you can meet emission standards. And that's been going on for quite some time. That really limits contractors for dredging. There's really this is the only electric dredge in the region capable of dredging Santa Barbara Harbor. There is a caveat to that. If you can, I think you can work under 7 days and slip under this rule. So we've had bids in the past where the contractors thought they'd come in, dredge 7 days, and then leave. But this is a concern to the Corps, and the reason why they believe they're not getting the competition that you would normally get. Normally you get multiple bidders, and if you had to reject the low bid for whatever reason, you'd move on to the next bid. So the Corps may be looking into that particular regulation. In general, electric dredges are great. The emissions are lower. Unfortunately, it's not like cars where there's more and more electric cars available every year. There's fewer and fewer electric dredges every year. So it's going to be quite the challenge. And this dredge is capable of doing the job, and the contractor is capable of doing the job. It's purely a contractual issue. So in conclusion, this year, the Corps believes they'll complete negotiations with the contractor this week, execute a contract the following week, and hopefully the dredge contractor will begin mobilizing in early February. It's about 3 weeks to mobilize because they have to put the dredge yard back up, 8,000 foot of fence, get everything running again. So there's going to be a very short window of opportunity to dredge the sediment. In the meantime, even though we do have some large swells forecast, we hope that not too much of that sand gets deposited in the channel and that these guys can get to work and clear the channel so it'll be open and safe for the summer. And moving into the next couple of years, we'll be able to have adequate dredging. This concludes my report this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Carl, for the report. Are there questions? Commissioner Sloan.
Thank you for the report, Carl. In the past, they've had to take all the piping out, and when it goes out to bid, did that have to occur this time where they take all the piping out and then put it right back in when they win the contract back?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, that's true. They had to do that again. They tried to level the playing field by having the contractor remove everything, and then the same and only contractor bids again 3 months later. So it's unfortunate, but that's what the Corps requires.
In the past, we've talked about maybe owning that pipeline or having a common coupling to it or something like that. And I know now with I believe the bridge is going to be redone over on Mission Creek, or whatever that creek is. Has any more thought been given to that?
The Mission Creek project is going to go forward, and the idea would be to have a permanent sleeve across the creek, and that'd be a small element to it. We were reluctant to provide some of the facility necessary for dredging. There's a lot of maintenance associated with it. The Corps of Engineers, they haven't requested or required that of us. Typically, they have the funds to move forward with the entire project. This year's a bit of an anomaly. Depending on how things work out the next few years, that may be back on the table. We've discussed it briefly in the past without much serious consideration.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for the report, Carl. Also on the new business, the lease agreement with Shoreline Beach Cafe. Ms. Brzezinski, would you read the staff report, please?
Lease agreement with Shoreline Beach Cafe. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend to the City Council approval of a 10-year lease agreement with 2 5-year options with Kevin Boss, Steve Marsh, and Beach Rock, Inc., a California corporation doing business as Shoreline Beach Cafe, at an average initial base rent of $14,342.06 per month, allocated seasonally, for the 5,095 square foot restaurant located at 801 Shoreline Drive.
Thank you. Mr. Bossi.
Good evening, Madam Chair. The Shoreline Beach Cafe has operated at 801 Shoreline Drive since 1997. Prior to that, it was known as the Ledbetter Beach Grill. And the current lease actually dates back to 1994 and expires this coming May of 2014. Due to the age of the lease format, it lacks the city's current insurance requirements, its standard lease assignment provisions, as well as maintenance and default clauses. Additionally, the lease has been assigned once, and it's been amended 3 times, so this is a perfect time to bring this particular lease up to current city standards and modernize it. The current lease requires a rent of 11.4% of gross sales, and that's more than any other waterfront full-service restaurant. The tenant in the negotiation process requested a flat 10% of gross sales. However, once staff did some additional analysis, we're recommending that a percentage rent of 10% of gross sales up to $1,250,000, and from that point on, 11.4% on any sales above that amount. So this percentage rent structure is similar to other full-service restaurant in the waterfront area, and it directly mimics, it's identical to the rent for the Santa Barbara Shellfish Company, which does about the same volume as Shoreline Beach Cafe. Now, the Shoreline Beach Cafe is a ground lease, and with that, the cafe is responsible for all the maintenance and repair and replacement on the property. So it's a little different than some of our other leases due to it being a ground lease. Shoreline Beach Cafe has significantly improved the lease space over the years. They have a well-designed shade canopy for patrons, new artistic deck railings, a deck heating system, and about a year ago they went in and completely renovated the deck. So as a result of that, as well as good service, et cetera, we have seen our rent payments to the city go up by 92% over the past 10 years. So that's a significant increase in the payments that they've been providing to the city. I should also mention that in the very near future, Shoreline Beach Cafe is going to have to be replacing their roof. Not a cheap thing to do. It is ceramic. It is the ceramic tiles, the standard red tiles in the city. It's an old building, and you never know what you're going to find there. So they do have that, as well as some possible structural issues that they're going to have to address. And again, being that it's a ground lease, those are on their dime. And we feel that because of that, the change in the rental structure is valid. So in summary, the business terms of the lease are a 10-year initial term followed by 2 5-year options, an average of $14,342 per month allocated seasonally. This will also have a CPI increase annually. And the percentage rent would be 10% of the tenant's gross receipts up to $1.25 million, and 11.4% of the tenant's gross receipts in excess of that $1.25 million. Shoreline Beach Cafe is considered a tenant in good standing by the department. They have no outstanding default notices, and they've always been prompt with their rental payments. And with that, that concludes my report.
Thank you for the report. And Mr. Riedman.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to add, Steve Marsh, one of the principals, is here tonight in support of the lease recommendation, the staff lease recommendation. He's been a real pleasure to work with all these years and certainly does quite a good job with the restaurant. Over the years, it's grown to being our 5th largest revenue generator. behind the Harbor Restaurant, Brophy Brothers, Chuck's Waterfront Grill, and Moby Dick. And so Santa Barbara Shellfish Company and Shoreline Beach Cafe are kind of, every other year they sort of trade off as to who's number 5 and who's number 6. But significant revenue generator for the Waterfront Department, a very important lease for us. So we'd appreciate your consideration of the staff recommendation tonight.
Thank you. Questions from the Commissioner Sloan?
I'd just like to echo your comment, Scott. You know, I park in front of that restaurant about 3 times a week early in the morning, and it's always very clean and well organized. So I want to compliment Mr. Marsh. And one day I was there, and he was pulling plants out of the back of his truck to put out in front. So it's a well cared for property, and I think it's a great asset to the city. So,
Commissioner Kelly.
I would move to support the recommendation.
Been moved and seconded. Any, I was about to do, any comments on the motion?
I'm just curious who else has a ground lease? What other tenants or restaurants? If
Madam
any?
Chair, Commissioner Bantalin, that would be Harbor Restaurant, Moby Dick Restaurant, at Breakwater Cafe. Santa Barbara Shellfish Company is a multi-tenant building, so we maintain that building. Brophy Brothers is a multi-tenant building, so for instance, we maintain the roof and the structure of the building. Waterfront Grill, multi-tenant building, so we do the structural maintenance and fix the roof when the wind blows it off. So those are examples of other ground leases.
And then this is just, if you happen to have this offhand, when Char West, Sushi Go-Go, and Moby Dick are up for, when their leases are up, do we happen to know those 3? Because those just seem to be the other ones that are off.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bantalin, we believe that the 11.4% is appropriate for Char West and Sushi Go-Go. We've renegotiated those leases. I don't recall when they're up exactly, but they were renegotiated probably within the last 5-6 years or so. Moby Dick is not up. That does not expire until 2020, which actually is not that far away in the big scheme of things. But that lease is a very old lease. It has not been modernized at all. It was done in the 1980s. It has no CPI increase, for example. It's the only lease we have, I believe, that lacks a CPI increase. It's at that 10% level. So when we get there in 2020, we'll be looking to change that around.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion. It's been seconded.
I'll second.
It's been, okay.
Oh, has it been seconded?
I thought so. I thought Bill seconded.
Okay.
So I'm going to vote on the recommendation, on the staff report to accept it. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. It's recommended. Next item is the staff commission reports or communications. Do you have anything, Mr. Staff? Mr. Staff?
Mr. Staff.
Nothing from staff tonight, Madam Chair.
Okay. Do we have anything from the commission? Commissioner Spicer.
I have one thing. As Santa Barbarans, most of us are pretty aware of the value of water, and now that the governor has stated what I think many of us know or have known, that we're in a drought condition, I'm just curious what, if the waterfront has a drought plan, or if you could let us know in the subsequent meetings what our proactive plan for water conservation is. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, the city's water department has prepared a type of water conservation plan that we've recently reviewed, which I hope to bring to you, a summary of which next month, probably, with an implementation plan, probably a month or so later. So yeah, we are looking into that, and we're hoping to bring you up to speed with it in the near future.
Any other, Commissioner Kelly?
This has to do with the aftermath of the wind event in January. A lot of things got moved around, and I pulled a blue trash can, one of the recycling trash cans, out of the harbor, and just happened to put it on the dock. It has now started receiving bags, and it's apparently found a home where I pulled it out and set it on the dock. But it's only about 10 feet away from another recycling can, so it's at the head of H Finger in Marina One. I don't know where it's supposed to be, but that's where it's now living. Okay.
Okay, is that, okay, then motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.